All right. Okay, welcoming Dr. Stephanie Cawthon today. I'm
Uh, I
yeah.
did not turn off my notifications and I need to turn off my
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. No
because it
problem.
is going to, there we go. That should do, oh wait, one more.
It'll ping you.
It'll ping and you hear the ding, ding. Okay, that should be it. Sorry. Okay,
No
now,
problem.
okay.
Okay, we're starting again. Welcoming Dr. Stephanie Cawthon. Many of you who are involved in Your Bestselling Book and the Story Cure already know Stephanie because she has been our greatest ally since day one. She participated in the very first cohort of Your Bestselling Book in the fall of 2023 and was the first graduate to finish her book and get it published. Yes, so awesome. We've had a couple more since, but she was the first, and I'm just so impressed with her dedication and hard work. But today, we're going to be talking about something a little different. So, the topic of Stephanie's book, which I'll let her tell you a little bit more about, is Disability is Human. And I wanted to have a conversation with her about the story cure and how the stories we tell about disability, accessibility, and being an anti-ableist, especially in today's political climate, where programs are getting slashed like crazy. What do we need to know? What can we do? And how can we be allies? So thank you, Stephanie, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, May. It's always a wonderful opportunity to be with you in your spaces. I say multiple spaces because you have many.
Well,
Um,
we're thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to record this conversation, share it at full length on our YouTube channel, and then also in shorter clips on YouTube Shorts and on social media. And hopefully, just maybe we can make a difference and get one or two or three or a dozen people to care and do something and take one small action, and we'll ask you what to do. So, I would love for you to start by telling us a little bit about your own journey and what got you into this space, and then where you are now in this space.
Certainly. Thank you very much. So my own journey, I would say started from day one, but you probably don't realize it. I think the first aha moment of the journey would be as a Stanford undergrad would be the first aha moment. I was sitting, actually Stanford at Oxford. I was sitting with my advisor talking about language development and being all very scholarly. And she kept asking me all these questions. And I realized as a deaf and hard of hearing person, the answers were very different. And she had this quizzical look and said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I think I need to find out." And so I started doing research out in Oxford and in London. And I brought that back to Stanford for my final year. And I brought that into a master's degree and I brought that into a PhD. And really, that one conversation, I can still see her sitting there with her pigtails. That one conversation really sort of triggered this understanding of different pathways to development, different pathways to outcomes, and that when we ask questions about what is typical or what is atypical, juxtaposing those against each other sometimes doesn't help a whole lot. And so, trying to understand what does it mean to be on a pathway that takes disability into account, and I think that has been the through line through the last goodness. I've been at the University of Texas for 20 years now, almost, and that is a couple decades of navigating that through different spaces and mentoring other people. So the journey to today and where I am in this space today is I always start with the many hats. Like I have a number of different ways in which I engage with this topic, and it impacts people in different spaces and places. And some of those are new, which is from the book. The book is the new space and place, but it's not distinct from or divorced from the others. And so, as an educator, I have graduate students, I have undergraduate students, and they are all coming to my classes thinking about what is this disability thing that I'm not sure if I have a sense of that. They usually come from a place of one or two things. Either it's their deep identity or their family, or they're deeply curious because they know they're going out into the world as a marketer or as a business person or health, and they want to make sure they know a little bit more than they do today. So the teaching space is really about being on a journey with people who are usually young people and who are in sort of formation stages of their careers. So that is, to me, I'll say it's an important aspect. It is a gift to have that chance to be in those spaces with them. And the thing that they come to realize is that there are no right answers. And they find that very frustrating. They would love for there to be a multiple choice quiz, and there's not. So, but working with students for a couple decades, I have come to realize that there are really three phases of understanding how to get to accessibility. Because accessibility is sort of the goal. Opportunity, however you want to name it, accessibility is the goal. But people often don't go back to why are we thinking about accessibility in the first place. And so what I try to do is encourage people, especially those who are already bought in, who's like, I really want to make my employee experience more accessible. I really want to make sure um, my church group is more accessible. They're already bought in and they're just looking for the route how. And what I've found is that the foundation understanding of people who are disabled people, and that's a very broad range, extremely broad range, much more prevalent than people think. What is ableism and why does that matter? Because that's often missed. And then how do we get to accessibility from there? And so part of what I bring to the conversation is that pathway again, but also understanding that people are looking for actionable steps. And there are these other things that need to happen first. So that's where the book came from, was a desire to do that. So the Disability is Human book and workbook, which is almost my favorite part, is really about taking some insights and some aha moments and helping people on a journey that makes sense for them. So that's where that's.
Okay, I love that. Thank you for that very clear overview. And I want to ask you about each of those components that you laid out, but I'd love for you to start with a story. So you told us your own
Mhm.
story. Can you give us a story of someone who maybe was a student or someone who was a classmate and what you saw, where you saw them being maybe blocked or, not facilitated in their learning journey, and how something that shifted, some action that somebody took that got them to a better place where like these
Mhm.
opportunities were unlocked? Could you
Mhm.
give us an example of that to make it a little more concrete?
Sure. Yeah, I can think of a couple, but let me just think of one that has always resonated with me. And so it was a story that was told to me by one of my students, and um, she was a student with autism, undergraduate, and she was in my class. And she came to every single office hour, and she had stories every single time about what was happening in her life. Sometimes positive, and sometimes joyful, and sometimes she was there crying. Just a whole range of emotion. And so I'll just say that the storytelling for her, especially with someone with autism who doesn't necessarily have a place to put it where she needs it, she used that office hours as a storytelling time. And not that I had answers, but she used that structured time when she knew I was available. She knew it was
Mm.
there to answer whatever questions about class, but it always started with a story. And so one of the stories she told me was about, she was talking about another professor, and she was talking about she had to write a paper. And she had to write a paper about disability. And she thought, well, I have autism. I am autistic. I identify as autistic. I'll write about that. And the paper, there's kind of a language conversation, some would say debate, about whether you say a disabled person or a person with disabilities. Comes up all the time. There's
I
no.
have definitely heard this. It was like disabled when we were kids. And then there was this whole period, I feel like it was like 10 or 20 years when it was like, never call somebody disabled. Say they are a person living with a disability.
Correct. Correct. And she is of the younger generation where it is, I get to choose what I get to say. And that's kind of what the basic thing is now, is that we don't correct disabled people for how they describe themselves. It's sort of square one. If someone wants to say disabled person, they can do that. If someone wants to say I'm a person with disabilities, they can do that. I use both depending on the context. So her specific story was about the fact that she wrote this paper using the terminology that she felt identified with. So she used the terminology of I am autistic, I have an autistic perspective, da, da, da. This was late in the semester. The professor would have known that this was something, because she's very transparent. And he went through her paper and corrected it all the way through and said, you are not
Oh my
an
God.
autistic person. You, student, are a person who has autism. And just redlined it all the way through. Find and replace. And she was sobbing. She said, the amount of pain that I didn't realize I was going to have and had. And then I had to change my whole paper and then turn it back in appeased, she was devastated. She was
Not authentic to her, appeasing the professor, but not authentic to
And
her
he
own
told her, you are
experience.
not allowed to say disability first language. He said, that is not how it is done. And you know, it is not how it was done for many years. It is also perhaps generational, perhaps contextual, maybe in his space, that's where it was, and it was a he. Uh, but we had just finished the unit on language. And there's a chapter in the book about language. And we talk about language. My first love was language. And you already know this, but it's one of those things where it resonated to my feet. And watching her sob just in like the letting go of, I was trying to tell my story with the words that are important to me. I was told by this person, and she knew that it was wrong. She knew that that whole scenario was not appropriate, and she was powerless. She said, I just need to get through this class. I just need my grade. And yeah. So that to me was a really clear explanation of why you don't tell disabled people how to describe themselves, because it matters. But also just that some people don't realize the ramifications. She went into a tailspin. This is finals week. And she's like, I'm just trying to graduate and I can't see straight because this emotional moment is now one I can't regulate. And that I was like, oh, no, there's one story. I know it took a while to tell it, but that's the story.
No. I like stories that take a while to tell. It's very clear example of someone doing harm in a way that they had no idea, right?
No
They had
idea.
no
Right.
idea.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so take us through, if you would, those three stages that you brought up at the beginning.
So if people come to disability and ableism and accessibility through different pathways, always. And I find that depending on your history with oppression, your history with trauma, especially trauma comes up again and again. And also what your professional role is or your life goal, you will come in at from different spaces. So the first beat, I'll call it three beats. As a theater person, three beats. The first beat is definitely, what is this disability thing?
Yeah.
And from an academic perspective, defining disability is actually very interesting because it's evolved so much. There's a medical approach to some of these things. There's a lived experience. What does it mean to live as a disabled person is very different than the label you might give someone or someone has. There are temporary disabilities. There are permanent disabilities. There are acquired disabilities. There's born with, like, it is
There's
rare.
visible visibilities and invisible visibilities,
Exactly.
right? Physical
And the
and psychiatric. Yeah,
Right, right.
right.
So the idea that we understand disability by just going, oh, you're disabled, I'm like, right. So we spend a lot of time in the class unpacking what does disability mean and what are the laws that are involved, because that's often how services and protections and rights are given, at least in our country. Because remember, before we were born, there was nothing available to support education and employment and that kind of thing. And that's why people get so nervous when those things are under conversation. Because it hasn't been that long. It really
Oh,
hasn't
yeah,
been.
when was the Americans with Disabilities Act passed? Can you remind us?
1990. So yeah, not that long ago.
Oh my God,
Yeah, I went through all
1990.
K-12 with nothing.
I would have guessed 1975, honestly.
There are some accents
Yeah.
around 73,
Wow.
75, but ADA was not till 1990. Yeah, very interesting
Okay.
how much time that took. And so I spent some time just understanding all of those things, both for the people who have disabilities to find themselves in that space, but also because it is an identity, and understanding what accessibility is, you need to understand the people you're designing for and with. And then just the prevalence. People are not aware of that 1 in 4 number that I bring up every single time. In fact, in the study we did at the National Disability Center, it was 1 in 2, because our young people are stressed out and mental health,
I
mental health.
was going to say, I bet it's higher than that because I
It's
see
1
the
in 2.
statistics
Yeah,
about
1
young
in
people
2,
with loneliness, depression, anxiety, and it
all that.
is, yeah.
All
And autism,
yes, yeah,
spectrum, whole thing.
ADHD.
Yeah,
Neurodiverse,
ADHD.
neurospicy.
Yep.
Someone said to this morning, I have
Ah,
3 neurospicy children. No, I started laughing.
I
Ah,
love that.
neurospicy.
Mm.
Um,
Okay.
and so this idea that the othering of disability is just so, to me, ironic. Because I'm like, you're othering yourself, your brother, your grandmother, like, who are you
Yep.
othering exactly?
Yourself or someone you love.
Yes, now or very soon.
Yeah.
And so we spend quite a bit of time just same paging, because sometimes when you have a group talking about this, people are coming in from such different perspectives that you have to same page. You have to really get a sense of what do these words mean? Why is the language around it evolving? What's happening there? And trying to give people permission to just learn, and that it is people centered. If it's not people centered, then why are we doing this? So it really brings in this sense. I also address emotions. What kind of emotions come up when you hear the word disability? Let's get real about that. What are some of the things that you surprise you about a disability, or when you have seen, all these? I think of the great things that Simone Biles has done around mental health, and May is Mental Health Month, and it's one of those things where you really see that conversation. But she is an icon, but she's
She's
still
an icon.
Biles as a person who's not an icon. And so it's one of those things of like we need to really think that the people behind the labels or the people behind the icons are still disabled and navigating a world that is still not designed for that, no matter what. We even with ADA in 1990, still not designed for that. So once the disability same page is sort of started, it's not complete, but it's started. We do move to ableism because it's harder. I have been critiqued for not starting with ableism, and I think that's a fair critique. I think that is the harder thing to do. So people like you need to address that first. Um, I find that at least in my circles, my students and my people need to understand the people connection of it, and then understand the trauma and oppression and things that have happened internally, even by disabled people to other disabled people. Like that is a necessary transition in my mind. And so it's kind of like warming up the room in a way before you have the harder conversation. And that harder conversation, I think, is I mean, the example that I just gave of that story about someone telling someone with autism how to talk about themselves in a rather mean way, high stakes for her. It was her grade. It's her graduation. She's trying to go to dental school, which she did. She was successful. But it was also, that was a form of ableism, is to take the power away from a disabled person in how language is used. I tend to define ableism as the perspective and action that disabled people are less valued than people without disabilities. And that is sometimes very subtle, often very subtle. So we talk about implicit bias. We talk about things that are not necessarily named, as I think that you in that wheelchair are less valuable than me, but the things that my institution or that my actions are show that. They show that even if they don't say that. So when you talk about, show me, don't tell me, it's the showing. That's what people react to, is the show. And so that is, we spend quite a bit of time with that. And I'll say that that is where, at least in my class format or when I'm with people in a workshop, that's where the disabled people have their moment. They say,
I
please,
love that. That's
please
beautiful. They
listen.
get to tell their story.
They tell their stories. That is where the storytelling, where you cannot argue with examples. Like you just have to take it in. And it's not necessarily that my story is more important than your story, but it is, all stories here are relevant, and they are a powerful teaching moment. And that is one of the things about the book that I struggled with, because I thought, why would my book be any more important than someone else's book? Why would my version of these stories or my experience of these stories be something someone would want to read? And what I've come to realize is that the compilation of the stories is the important part. And the fact that they are out there with a frame around them saying, let's pay attention to this for today. What does this make you think about tomorrow? It's not like this one story is better than the other story, but curation of stories, I think, is what an author does, is curate the stories. So that is where the ableism starts to really sink in, because people start to understand that that is not an experience that is unfamiliar, that they could see that happening, especially when it talks about like people making jokes or using language to be funny. Like a
Mm.
lot of people realize after an experience where people name how a joke that is at the expense of a disabled person is really indicating a value of the person. You know, that if I'm making fun of you, I am devaluing you. Like that,
Or even saying something as like, oh, my OCD, I'm so
all
OCD,
that, yeah,
right?
yeah,
That kind of
yeah.
thing, which is very casual, might not, it's not, you're not intentionally dismissing people who are diagnosed with OCD and struggling with it in their daily life. But if you're
You are
not
drawing
at
attention to
all,
yourself. And that's what I think
right?
jokes are too. Like you're trying to be funny in the room. Like that's what I've
Hmm.
noticed. It's a lot about my own desire for attention, one way or the other,
Interesting.
when I do that. Yeah,
Okay.
often, not exclusive, but often. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the ableism thing, I think, you know, it is fraught. It is also got layers of trauma in there. When people are talking
Mm.
about ableism, some of it's continuing. They're in the middle of it now. They're in structures or employment places where that's happening today, you know. So there is some sense of definitely care needs to be taken when those stories are shared and how they're shared and where they're shared. So that to me, in the book itself, was an opportunity to do that, but it's also why people are de-identified, because that is that is when I made the decision not to name who people were, or even to make that something that was a possibility, because there was too much trauma loaded stuff being shared, and I just felt like that I couldn't do for some and not for, you know, other than myself.
And then yourself. So can you share a story with us? Are you willing to share a story with us?
Sure.
Maybe of
I'm trying to
yourself
think of
or
one that will also not somehow reveal. I mean, I always think of the opening story of that seventh grade teacher, you know.
I mean, you can tell that here because there are people who haven't heard that, and that is a
Yeah, so
really
the
powerful story.
seventh grade teacher, science teacher, who looked at me one day and said, "You will never make it past algebra, or you never go to college with the math past algebra." And just out of the blue, and I remember being very confused, and you know, I remember looking around, and I'm constantly, you know, I was very much lip reading everything at that point, and I was just like, what, did I miss this? I was like, are you talking to the person behind me? Like I remember looking behind me to see if so and so was behind me. And no, she was talking to me, and just she had a very sort of like scrunched up face, and just this sort of flat out, you're never going to make it past algebra. And I just remember being befuddled. First of all, it's straight A's in math. I liked math. I mean, I hadn't taken algebra yet, but that was next year. You know, I just kind of like, give me a chance to fail before you tell me what I can and cannot do. But
Oh,
there was nothing other than my hearing loss for her to hang that on. There was nothing. And she had only known me for 3 months at that point. I remember this was early in the school year, and it was middle school, so you know you hadn't. And so I carried that for a long time, and there was sort of a defiance when I became a physics major in college at first, and just be like, well, I may not make it very long, but I certainly made it past algebra, you know. But I just,
yeah.
again, the damage that I know she has done to other people, because that was just her way. Like she would put boundaries in front of people before they even had a chance to even try. And a funny follow-up to that story is my brother went to the same school, and he read the book and he said, I think I know who that was. I was like, oh, you know who that was because you heard similar things also with hearing loss. Maybe not about algebra, but just your value and your potential was
Your
being
value.
communicated immediately, if not
You
sooner.
are less than.
Yes, you will not make this standard that I've just put
Yeah.
out, you know. Anyway, so that's my ableism story that I think a lot of people might resonate with.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, sorry that happened to you. And obviously you moved past it.
Yeah, for sure. But when I talk
All
about
right. So,
ableism in education, I think of that moment often. That's why I started the book. Well, part of it. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. So, and then the last beat, if you wanted the third beat, was accessibility, and that is, how do we all authentically engage with ourselves, with our ideas, with others, in a way that is equal opportunity and
mm,
um, possibility. I guess going back to that idea of like, how do you define for others? But accessibility doesn't mean that everyone does the things the same way, but it does mean that you are able to fulfill whatever it is you need to fulfill. Uh, Again, not exactly the same way, but at least not like radically different to the point where it's unequal. And it does the way I approach accessibility and why I include relationship with yourself, because I think that's unique in a lot of the accessibility conversations, is because I think that this idea that we have to be confident and know that we have value in order to move forward in the world in an authentic way. We have to be able to tell our story.
mm.
And if there aren't places where our story is welcomed over others, that's an immediate disconnect from yourself. Immediate. And so, we talk about access to networks of people, access to jobs, access to school, access to the ramp down the street. Like, those are all very visible signs, but to me, it's the relationship with yourself is also part of that picture. And I think that has only come to me in recent years as we all get older.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
So the
So
tips,
how do you see
strategies.
that?
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out? Like, can you give us an example of that since you work in education, you work in a university as a professor? How do you see that? Is there like, I think of something you talked about of kind of like, okay, there has to be a sign language interpreter in every classroom all the time in order for things to be accessible versus like, what does this person need? Like, how
Hmm.
does that play out? And what is the responsibility to the person who is being an anti-ableist in that situation?
Well, let's use that ASL example because it's one that I can
Okay.
relate to. So having an interpreter is not a monolithic thing. There are some nuances that are really important. So, for example, I won't say best practices, but good practices are that I would be able to say, this particular interpreter is not just a bad fit for me, doesn't interpret in a way that I can understand and engage in what's happening. I can say, not that person, please. And have hopefully not a long list, but a list and say, this is a no-go list, and have that list be respected. And if that person is being considered, to at least give me a heads up. Like, that's the minimum. To not arrive at a site and be like, why are you, and not be able to do anything, so it's sort of, and so that's because the interpreter is there to provide voice or to provide language input that is critical to my comfort and ease in a conversation, to someone receiving what it is I have to say. Especially when I'm voicing and when I'm signing and someone's voicing for me, that can go everywhere sideways in a hurry for just level of skill. So often as an academic and someone standing in front of a classroom, it's not casual. It's very
That's right.
precise,
It's very high level, specific language.
specific, and
Yeah.
just, and it doesn't necessarily mean technical, but it does need to be accurate. And
Yeah.
that's hard to do if someone just walks into your world and has never seen you before, has never read who you are. So something that I value about an accessible system is that I have interpreters who know me. And
Mm,
the institution has a system set up where I can have consistency across time points. So, example, I had 3 meetings this morning and I had my same pair of interpreters, and they know what I'm going to say before I'm going to say it because the content is familiar to them, and they're able to course correct. Like, if someone asks me a question that is not quite right, they're able to do a little bit of a translation so that they know where it fits. Now I'm using science, but that idea that I have a say in what my access looks like, and that my decisions are respected. Both of those things are true. And that the nuances of accessibility isn't just any old interpreter will do. Well, actually it won't. So those things are critically important. That might be, yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's,
no, that was super helpful. That was a very, very helpful, concrete example.
yeah.
Yeah. I hear something I've heard something said many times over the years, which is the kind of like, oh, do you know that helping disabled kids in the school system, they cost, whatever, X times, 5 times as much as a normal kid. That's something I've heard so many times.
Yes. I have a very clear view that the system is meant to serve everyone, and the cost is not about one person. It's about what it costs to serve a population, and that's just the cost. There are ways to talk about money and cost, and it is not in the initial response to a request. That is not when you start thinking. That is in the wrong time. You think about what
Well
is needed
said.
for access, and then you think about infrastructure and cost support. That just, there is a time and place for that, but it is not as the person makes the request. And it's certainly not saying, oh, we're going to talk about your value and worth based on the cost estimate. Like that is, I mean, I've had situations where I've asked for access as a keynote speaker and they said, oh, we're going to have to reduce your pay in order to make that happen.
What? Have
Yes.
you really?
Yes. And if that's not an explicit acknowledgement that the disabled person is not valued as much as an able person, I don't know what else is.
I don't know what is. Yeah, that's putting a monetary value on that. That is,
Yeah.
wowza.
Yeah. It has to come out of your own budget. Basically, you have to pay for it. Yeah. It happens a lot. I have talked to people as professionals, especially in things that are like gigs, like your access, you pay for your access, which is borderline unethical, I think. But also,
I think it is.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think it is.
But it's also,
You
it
kind of,
just, what it demonstrates is a lack of understanding of that an access budget needs to be built into your design from the beginning. You know, you can make a
so I
guess.
was going to ask you, what is your solution to that? And so the
Yeah, your
solution is
answer is
build it
not
into your
zero
budget.
money until someone
Zero
needs.
money.
Yeah, that's not the answer. Yeah.
Cutbacks.
Yeah.
We can't afford that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's very helpful. What do you see in terms of technology? Like, are you hopeful? I mean, I'm looking at AI and, for example, transcripts. I mean, like, my God, right? I mean, look at, like, we have improved by leaps and bounds. Like, everything
Mhm.
is subtitled now. In fact, many people prefer subtitles no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think the auto transcription is improving. I think it can easy to be lazy and go, it'll be good enough without checking and uploading. I think that's the point where we still need to make sure that it is accurate again. But the level of detail that is brought to us that we can then review is so much better than it used to be. 100%. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. But
Yeah. I'm thinking
that's
also of
like
like
check. You
AR.
still need to
I'm
check,
thinking,
you know?
yeah, no, right. Still need to check. I'm thinking also like AR and VR and sort of like, with people who don't see completely and all kinds of brain functions.
Yeah.
It feels like there's lots of ways in which technology is benefiting.
I think so too. I think the thing that I'm wary of is like, oh, you sit there with this giant headset while everybody else gets to just, walk around the room. Like that, I'm like, yeah, there are tools, and then there's the giant headset. Like,
Then there's the giants.
you know.
Excellent point. Tell us a little bit about your book and like the kinds of audiences that you're speaking to and how you're seeing them engage with the material. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and I think we're 6 months out, so it's a good
Okay.
benchmark of,
Okay.
well, rough 6 months. I'll say it's not the time when people have been wanting to buy books the last 6 months. So it is definitely
No.
interesting to see who does when it's not easy. So who does when it's not easy? The part, I'll say the surprises first, and then some things that just I've been thinking about. Uh, the disability advocacy community is not who the book was written for, but they're the people who buy books first. It's fascinating. They want them on their shelves. They want to know what's being said in this space, even if they aren't the target audience. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I felt a little like I'm not sure how to target marketing because I wasn't marketing towards that. But they're the ones who notice it first, who are automatically recommending it to other people. And so knowing that those sort of advocates are out there, even if the information is new, not new to them, and that surprised me. Like it's not just people who are like, I don't know what, maybe I'll read a book. People don't always buy books to get new information.
Great observation. I love that. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that before, Stephanie. Very excellent point.
Yeah. So the motivation behind book buying was a surprise to me. And that one in particular.
Okay.
Yeah. So, because I wasn't there to sort of add insights to people who live it every day. Like, no, but they're the ones who are tracking what's out in the field and are the first to uptake. Absolutely.
Well, and they might be looking for more tools in their toolkit, right? Like for example, I have these other 8 books, but this is the one that's going to speak to you. Yeah.
Exactly. The second thing I had originally wanted it to be, I feel like the place of greatest opportunity in residence are middle managers, HR, people who are managing people, who have to face some of these disability accommodations questions, who may be in healthcare, who may be in industries where caring for people is part of the mission and purpose. I think there has been some of that. Of course, we don't know who buys things necessarily, but I do think I find some resonance with that. I've written quite a few pieces with HR mindset in mind, and they are very easy to write. They are very clear, like it is a clear way of bringing the argument into that context. I think I would like to stay there. I think I would like that to continue. I do think that's a place of impact that, our more business space is an important place of impact. I would not want to not keep trying in that area. I have found book clubs, corporate book clubs, which is something I had hoped for. It's mostly nonprofits. So I'll have a conversation with some folks who are either sometimes academia, but not much. There's not much academia, which doesn't surprise me.
Really?
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. But are nonprofits who have a budget, first of all, for a speaker to come for an hour, and who are interested in talking about writing a book and sort of the behind the scenes on that. So that has been kind of a surprise and something I had designed the book for that. So I'm glad that actually worked. That did work. The design for book clubs, and some of them booking like 3-part series, and I come in at the end. So they have 3 Zoom meetings that look at different sections, and then they do an author Q&A on the third one, or something like that. So it's interesting to see how they structure what does it mean to engage with colleagues around disability and accessibility. It's usually led by one of those advocates, though. I swear they're in it to win it. So that's been good. I am revising my courses to use the book for the fall.
Yay!
Yes, which is a significant overhaul. However, in doing that, I'm like, this is a great book supplement for even high school. I've gotten some high school people saying, this is so, the reading level is so accessible. Like, this would be so great for our advanced high school students who are interested in learning. Like it is really at that level.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Totally. And use it as a textbook, essentially.
They could use it as a textbook. Again, it's lower cost than your sort of like typical hardcover textbooks.
Exactly.
So it could be a supplement. But the thing is that workbook now is like, I'm having my moment because people can use it and just immediately run with, oh, I really want to talk about ableism in sports. Okay, I can adapt this activity to ableism in sports. So I think that is my forward-looking thing, is to make sure that I communicate clearly what the book can be in a learning space with students undergrad and high school. So that's what's next.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I mean, I really did see, I thought that that would be the first place that you would go because you're a professor at UT Austin, a very highly respectable institution, not just an institution, but a very respected one, that it
Right.
would go straight into that. But I like the idea of it at the high school level too. I mean, even more impactful, even getting people even more in their formative years
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
carry forward with them, you know, and with this younger generation, as we've discussed, being really very in tune to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking for ways to bring some of those conversations in a space where there are a lot of policies about what you can and cannot say and can and cannot do. And so bringing that storytelling and empathy into a world that still needs that. So that's the goal.
All right. So tell us what people who are listening to this, or if we cut it up into little short snippets, give us like a takeaway. I know you said there's no easy takeaways. Maybe that's your takeaway. Whatever. I let you, whatever is your one of your key takeaways that you'd like people to think of
Um, Point of clarification, takeaway.
when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to
Oh, when it comes to
accessibility and being an
accessibility.
anti-ableist. Yes.
Sure. I think, let me think about that for a second. When it comes to accessibility and I will say dismantling ableism, because we all have a role to play, that is find out what your role is. Because no one is exempt, even if you have a disability. You are part of a culture that was built on othering disability and not designed for disabled people to be fully present. And so I think thinking about what is that next small step always. Talking to other people about it in a place where that is available. I think that could be just around your kitchen table with your kids. That is 100% bringing it into being. That conversations about, how do we think about making this more accessible for your friend Jerry.
Yeah.
Just make it concrete, make it person centered, and think about the next best thing. I know that's sort of like a cliche, but it's absolutely applicable here. And doing it in a group is even better.
That's great advice. No, it's very actionable and concrete. Anything else you want to say or that I didn't touch on?
No, I think just the chance to say that, I gave a presentation last week at a big academic conference, huge academic conference, and they asked me to talk about the current state of disability in education and accessibility. And I thought, well, you're not getting slides ahead of time because it changes every 5 minutes. And so
No kidding.
I came into that room and I had a pretty good sense of what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how it was going to go. But and again, this was 7:30 at night, last night of the conference on a Saturday. Everyone's exhausted. No one wants to be in a cold, like windowless cubby. So, after encouraging people to physically sit in a place where you could actually contact another person, everyone likes to sit in the back row. And I said, okay, everybody come up to the front. And some people knew each other, some people knew me. So there was some level of familiarity, which was helpful. Um, and I said, at this time and place, what's really helpful is to name where you're at. Because there's some folks who have been fired from their jobs because they were,
That's right.
there's some folks who have lost funding for whatever medical thing they have. So there are some folks who are like, today I am really just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Or my husband is worried about losing his job, or, et cetera, et cetera. Or my kid can't get the diagnosis that they need because the line is, the wait is 3 months. Whatever it may be. There's some folks who are more in the observing space. So I said, it's really helpful to name where you are. What is your arena? I call it the arena. You have to stand in the arena, very Roosevelt. But like naming, when are you center stage? When is it a public experience for you? When it is related to accessibility or disability? When is it that you are the focus? And when is it that you're an observer? When are you in the arena watching? Or as part of the stands. And I gave a few examples from my own life. Some were very clear because of the jobs that I have, but some are not. And I gave both examples. And some are very much in the context of who we are today. And that, first of all, people were crying. And I was like, I did not mean to make you cry. I did not mean that.
Oh.
But you know, after they talked through it with it, we did a think, pair, share, talked through it with somebody next to them. And then it came back and said, what bubbled to the surface? And two things bubbled to the surface, which I think are relevant for the people watching this. The first is that emotions was number one. People refer to
Yes.
emotions first
Yes. So
every
relevant.
single time.
So relevant.
Every single
Emotions
time. And it's
first.
like we have been so
Yep.
overloaded by information, but we are not able to keep up with our emotions. Like it's really
Yep.
so they were given this 10-minute,
Mm.
15-minute space, maybe 20 if you include just reflecting,
Ugh.
talking. And those emotions just came roaring forward.
Wow.
And luckily, again, it was sort of a semi familiar space where people could manage that. You know, there were places, there were Kleenex around, you know, metaphorically. And the second thing was the how does emotion and thinking go together? And you know, we both went from Stanford Psych program. We know that those things are tied together. And so like how do they connect their emotions with their thoughts, their emotions with their actions? And like how do they keep those things from being so separated that they don't know what to do now? And that was the second thing. So the first was just overwhelming. We haven't had a chance to emotionally process where things are. And the second is how do I make sure that those things are connected? And that meant a lot to me that they were able to say that. But that
Mm.
in the world of disability and accessibility, that's where we're at right now, I think. And I think that was very much in that group who for a living are talking about accessibility. That is why they are there. I said, you know, don't forget that your why has not changed. So that was really helpful.
I love that. That is so powerful. And how beautiful that you were able to create space for people to share their stories and feel the feelings. And it is really extremely depressing to look at what's happening right now. So I'm glad that it's nice to have a positive, uplifting story of your caring community.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think that's what people were looking for. And again,
Yeah.
I say I was completely humble. It's like
Mm.
I be the one shepherding this conversation, but here we are.
Oh my
But it is
gosh.
because of the book. It's because some of them had read the book. They're
Uh,
like, you can do this with us today. I'm like, okay, I will. Yeah, it's because of the book.
um,
Yeah.
and what a better way for them to spend their Saturday night too than listening to a lecture with slides, right? I mean, they'll carry it with them forever. You know, that's
Yeah,
the
they
beauty
will.
of the
They will.
emotion. You carry it with you.
Mhm.
Oh, amazing story. I love that. Beautiful. Well, Stephanie, where can we find you? Tell us all the things.
Oh, okay. My website is probably the best place to start, stephaniecawthon.com. It'll be in a link somewhere.
Yep.
LinkedIn is also my sort of playground, and I really do think carefully about how to communicate on that space. So find me there, and otherwise, just sign up for my newsletter. You get a monthly rundown on what's going on, and it's I try to balance all the things. So that's definitely true.
It's a great newsletter. I really enjoy it. Yeah. It's always a good amount of updates on what's going on and stories and thoughtful moments, things to think about and consider. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. In the
Well,
moment.
thank you so much for coming on today and talking with me again. And thank you for being an advocate and encouraging all of us to be as well.
Thank you for you and your team for all you do.
Thank you.